Welcome, everyone, and welcome to my dear friend Harris. How are you, Harris?
I'm very good. How are you?
I'm very well indeed,
I,
and
I,
I'm
lo- I
very
love the.
excited for the topic.
Yeah, so am I. I'm excited too. And yeah, thanks for inviting me. And I like the intro. I like the Arab music, the stuff. Yeah.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, so today we're going to discuss the topic of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and what's been happening in Israel, Palestine, Hamas, Gaza. And I know that this topic is very divisive. I see people on both sides taking very strong stands and very divided by emotions and biases. And we might not be excluded from this. I don't know where you stand, and I haven't certainly revealed where I stand fully on the matter. But I
I have a
think
feeling. I think we have a feeling where we stand. And that's why
totally.
I think I was excited to agree because, as you said, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt. Go on.
That's all right, and I also read some of your, posts on
Tweets. Yeah.
Twitter or X
Mm.
now. So I do have a feeling or a bit of understanding of where you stand, and this is why it's very important to have this discussion with you. So unless you want to clarify anything, I'm happy to throw my first question at you.
I think it's probably best if I actually lay down my initial position because we got to start from somewhere. And because
Right.
when we drill further down into our arguments, I think we get lost of the initial position and we go, oh, but that happened. But hang on, that doesn't have any bearing on the initial position. So my initial
Right.
position always starts from this that regardless
And I
of his how
sorry,
Israel
before
was
you say your initial position, this is deliberately why when I wrote the first question, I put it
okay.
let me start by the usually oversimplified question, are you pro-Israel or pro-Palestine? And I do
Yeah.
acknowledge that it's an oversimplification of the question. So that said, let's scrap that question and please
And actually, that's
clarify your
that's actually a
answer.
very good question. I'm actually glad that you put it that way because if you say that some Palestinians are not happy with Hamas. I've certainly seen a lot of their videos too. That I'm pro Palestine. I think the future of Palestine lies in being okay, maybe not entirely a Western style democracy, but a democracy nonetheless. And that is not going to happen under Hamas. So I am in favor of Palestinian independence. I am in favor of the creation of the Palestinian state. But at the same time, I cannot accept from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, or so called one state solution. So my position starts with this: Israel has a right to exist, and Israel has a right to defend itself. No sovereign country can allow any group or another country or an organization to come and kill its civilians regardless of the political objective. Because if you ask Osama bin Laden, he would write you a 1,000-page grievance with the West. So we can't accept that. We have to draw a line somewhere. So Israel is a state. It has a right to exist and it has a right to defend itself. Hamas is a terrorist organization and it should be eradicated. That's my initial position. Now, how do they go about it? Can we say that is Israel being a bit reckless, or is some pro-Israel people would say that there's no other army that takes as much care as IDF in minimizing civilian casualties, and then we say why the number of civilian casualties so high. So I think those are secondary topics, but we need to start from some place. By we, I mean people who do not support or who do not recognize Israel's right to exist. We need to tell them that this point is non-negotiable, regardless of how it started. I've said it numerous times that if I was in the 1940s as an atheist, I would have opposed the creation of Israeli state purely as an atheist because I don't think that any imaginary being can say this piece of land belongs to you. I would have also opposed the creation of Pakistan, my country of birth, because, well, why are you dividing country on the basis of we want to live here because we're Muslim? We don't want to live under the majority Hindu rule. So I would have opposed it. But now there's a concept called historical conservatism. What's happened has happened. Now we have to find a way to coexist. By coexistence, I mean not destroying everything that already exists. It doesn't necessarily mean one state solution, as some people do suggest that. And I don't think you can blame the Israelis not to want a one state solution because I'm sorry, when it comes to Muslims, they don't have a good track record of showing that they are capable of creating good, vibrant, secular societies. So that's my position initially. So I don't know, take it as you will. Is that pro-Israel? Is that pro-Palestine? I think I'm equally pro-Palestine as well, because if Israel opposes two-state solution, I'm against Israel on that topic.
Let me start with the point of agreement. I agree in the right of any sovereign nation to defend itself. I don't think that makes me pro anything, any pro Palestine, pro Britain, pro Australia. Any nation that is under attack has the right to defend itself. But in that context, do you then think that no matter how many innocent civilians get killed in this self defense, that is considered a collateral damage? Let me revise the question. Is there any moral measure or ethical limit on the retaliation or the self defense, Israel or not, or any other country? Do you draw any limit on that self defense, or where do you draw the line?
Well, I don't think there's a clear line. I don't think there's a black and white answer, because there is no war ever in the history of mankind where there hasn't been any collateral damage. By the way, collateral damage is perfectly acceptable under Islamic teachings as well. There's a Sunan ibn Majah Sahih hadith that when Prophet Muhammad was asked why, when we raid these polytheists at nighttime, a lot of women and children get killed, Prophet Muhammad said, "Well, that's okay. They're one of them." Again, now I'm an atheist. I'm not drawing any moral lessons from Prophet Muhammad, but I'm just highlighting the point that for every society, collateral damage becomes okay for them. Although it's not a desired result, unless obviously there are some genocidal ambitions where they deliberately want to go after civilian population, then obviously it's condemnable. But if it happens as a side effect of a war, then you can't really say that either 10,000 is enough or 20,000 is too much, and we're not going to go over 5,000, because you have military targets, you have military objectives. And this is why it's collateral damage is not against international law, because people who wrote the Geneva Convention, they also understand that it's not that simple. However, there are some guidelines around it. And I think, to the best of my knowledge, as much as I've been vigorously trying to find something wrong in their operations, yes, surely they would have made some mistakes, bad intel, etc. But as long as the IDF does not go in with the intention of killing civilians, to terrorize Palestinian people, it's not against international law. The international law also allows you to conduct operations on hospitals, schools, or any civilian establishment that is being used for military purposes, as long as you give them advance warning, advance notice. And Israel has shared that evidence plenty of times. They've sent text messages, pamphlets. The ground operation was halted for a very long time, although some people say that they were scared to go in. Take it as you will. But there's plenty of evidence. We have seen videos where the IDF has notified the occupants of the building that they're going to be bombing that building, and people are trying to escape that building, whereas Hamas operatives have been shooting at them. And we've seen those videos as well, forcing them to go back inside the building, because it makes sense. Civilian casualties serves absolutely no military or political objective for Israel, but it definitely does for Hamas. Hamas wants higher number of civilian casualties. So people outside of the conflict look at that, and obviously nobody wants to see those harrowing, confronting, graphic images of children being blown to bits. Nobody wants to see that. And it doesn't make it easy for Israel either. So to answer your question, is there a limit? I don't think so. There is no limit. You can't quantify that. I always give this question, Adam, and I'd like your thoughts on that. Some people say that this is a disproportionate response. They killed your 1,200 people. You've killed 12,000, let's just say. I think the number's gone up to
Right.
14. Let's just say.
Yeah.
So this is way disproportionate. Proportionality actually does not matter in this case. What if Israel was able to kill 30,000 Hamas terrorists if IDF was able to destroy Hamas in its entirety with only 500 Palestinian civilian casualties? Would anyone have said that, oh, by the way, we killed 1,200 of your civilians, you've only killed 500, you can come and kill another 700 Palestinian civilians? You would have said no. So how would you draw proportionality in that case? How would you say that Palestinian to Israeli civilian casualty is way out of whack? You would not have admitted that, because it's not about that. That's not what you want. The objective is to free Gaza from Hamas. It is unfortunate that more and more civilians are dying. And I think this is also a good process. The rest of the world, the free world, they are constantly keeping an eye on this, and they're constantly, I'm sure, through back channels, they are constantly pressuring the Israeli government to keep the number as low as it possible. As I said, it just does not make any sense. It makes no political or military sense for Israel to see the number of civilian casualties going up.
Let me stop you here and play the devil's advocate deliberately. I want to. People will say that actually no, there is benefit for Israel to kill civilians in such masses, which is ethnic cleansing. And I'm saying here that I'm putting the devil's advocate. I will make the claim that Israel is doing this massive retaliation out of proportion with the intention of ethnically cleansing Palestinians and freeing as much as possible of the Gaza Strip. Hence, Israel would have the upper hand. But that, of course, they're not going to admit that. So they're trying to fake videos. And we have seen fake videos that Israel has been promoting fake videos to show that hospitals and schools are being military targets and occupied by the terrorist group Hamas and all that jazz in order to justify an attack on civilian targets with the intention of ethnic cleansing. What's your response to that?
If you go by a 10,000 number out of 2.2 million people that live in Gaza, if you want to commit a genocide, if you want to ethnically cleanse a place so there are no occupants left to a certain piece of territory so you can occupy it without any resistance, then 10,000, 20,000, even 100,000, I think maybe over 100,000, you could start calling it a genocide or ethnic cleansing. 10,000, 15,000, as bad as it is, the number is bad and high and it scares us and it should scare us. The reason for that is because we are living in very peaceful times. We are living in times when even 10 people, 20 people, you can go to wars over a terrorist attack in which 50 civilians have died. You can literally go to war over that smaller number in a grand scheme of things. The number is still very small. So, no, there is no benefit of that. If Gaza is like, what is it per square kilometer, whatever the number is, it's so high. You're going to get 4 square kilometers if you're doing that with that intention? No, you're not going to do it. This just does not make any sense. If Israel was killing people when you're dealing with hundreds of thousands of people, 100,000, 150, 200,000, then I would say, okay. The other point that a lot of people make, they say, well, genocide is also displacing people. And so many people have moved to south, and then people are going to move again. And Israel just wants to occupy Gaza. And this is the reason why countries like Egyptian prime minister said, we will sacrifice a huge number of people for our territorial integrity. Basically, they refuse to take any Gaza civilian as a refugee. The premise being that if we let them in, Israel is not going to let them come back in. And I get it. Israel has this history of not letting previous refugees come back in, but it's not going to happen at this point, to the best of my knowledge. But if it does happen, then we can actually call it a genocide. I don't know whether Israel would allow them back in or not, but if they actually don't let them come back, then yes, then I will join you in calling it a genocide. But for now, moving or relocating people to avoid uh, civilian casualties, that's not genocide. That's not displacing. That's moving them out of the harm's way. And 14,000 people, as high as it is, it does not qualify genocide or ethnic cleansing.
Yeah, I agree with you. Let's start with that. But I also think that behind the scenes, not everything that Egypt, for instance, would say comes at face value. One of the reasons why, in my opinion, Egypt wouldn't open borders and take refugees is that Egypt had its own fair share of fighting terrorism with the Muslim Brotherhood, and the last thing Egypt wants. We nearly lost Sinai for terrorist groups before. So the last thing Egypt wants also is to open borders under the justification of letting Palestinian refugees to come in, and God knows who
Who
will
else
come
will
in
come?
through that process. Yeah. So part of Egypt resisting opening the borders and accepting refugees is that you cannot really separate the beads here. You cannot separate the genuine civilian Palestinians from the Trojan horses, the Hamas militants that can sneak into Egypt, and it will become much worse game.
It's a genuine concern. It's a genuine concern, but I wanna add another point to it. Do you think that in the same breath, would it be fair to overly criticize, although I'm actually in favor of that, but let's just follow the same logic. If a fellow Muslim country is not willing to take a risk, then should Israel be willing to take a risk of taking Palestinians as refugees? I actually share my opinion with Yuval Noah Harari. I heard him say that on Piers Morgan's show that it might not be that difficult to take women and children from Gaza
Mm,
into Israel as refugees. And then by the token of same logic, I would apply that on Egypt as well. Maybe we could take
absolutely.
women and children, or maybe Israel and Egypt could share the load. Out of 2.2 million, I would imagine maybe 1.2, 1.3 million would be women and children under the ages of 15, and you could frisk them at the border crossing. So I think a lot can be done, but obviously it tells me a lot that if a fellow Muslim country is nervous about taking people, then can you really blame Israel?
I wouldn't in that context. However, that takes us to the previous point that you raised, that maybe in that particular case, Egypt would have the justification that we don't want to take the women and children refugees because Israel might not allow them to come back in. However, if Israel allowed the women and children as refugees, that eradicates the point. So it
Yeah,
sounds more logical
yeah,
for Israel.
to take him. Yeah, no, look, as I said, I understand because one of the biggest hurdle in when you look into why this two-state solution can never come to bear any fruition because it's the refugee issue appears all the time, and the Palestinian side says that we want to bring back all the refugees, and Israel somehow has a problem with that, of course. So I think you could understand the Muslim side over their apprehension or thinking that Israel may not allow these refugees back. However, I think under this modern time, under guarantees from certain superpowers like America, for instance, I think it could be done. I don't think that could be that much of an issue when it comes to saving lives.
I want to address this comment that I put on the screen, and I think Harris already responded to that. Uh, I guess I put the devil's advocate hat, and I said exactly what's written in the comment. And Harris's point was, "What's 10,000 numbers? As scary as the number is, and it's not like to trivialize the number of civilians being killed, but to play the ethnic cleansing card and to say that it's definitely
It's an overreach.
this, yeah." It's not as 10,000 out of 2,000,000 cannot be ethnic cleansing in that sense. However, it's still a massive, sad reality. And the second Harris on that, I was reading the book of the Better Angels of Our Nature. I'm not sure
Mm,
if you read that,
I
Harris,
have.
and it shows exactly that, how we're living in a day and time where now, yes, if there is one child being killed, it's such a huge thing, and millions of hearts will ache for that one child. However, that's because we're living in the day of in
Extreme
today's
prosperity.
history.
Yeah.
Yes, but back in the days, you would ethnic cleanse millions of people, and you probably wouldn't hear about it at all.
Yeah. I
Uh,
just fact checked. So it's 6,507 people per square kilometer in Gaza. So
right.
if you go by, let's say, 18,000 people or 19 and a half, that's three times. So that's 3 square kilometers. That doesn't make any sense for them to kill 15,000 and call that ethnic cleansing. I have a special problem with a lot of these Muslim apologists who casually throw in words like genocide and ethnic cleansing. These words have meanings. There is a reason why we have different words for murder, collateral damage, war casualties, genocide, and ethnic cleansing. We have these words for a reason. I don't know if you watched that rabbi's debate with Muhammad Hijab. Muhammad Hijab did not call it genocide at any point in the debate. He did not call it a genocide because he knew this does not satisfy any
Qualify.
definition of
Mhm.
genocide. But when you see these people on social media, they keep using these buzzwords because we are also living in a very funny time when never in the history any people have hated their own society as much as they do now. And we call them these wokes, these contrarians, these self righteous, virtue signaling, tree hugging, snowflakey people suffering from pathological altruism. They have these certain buzzwords: oppressor, colonialism, ethnic cleansing, genocide, and then they just forget about everything. And it's chickens for KFC all over again. They just start going for it, and then they see just from that paradigm, they miss many nuances. So that's why this word is deliberately being used to capture this phenomena in the West, this woke phenomena in the West. That's why you see these LGBTQ people for Palestine. Why? Because it's oppressed. They're committing genocide. Every person that I've spoken to on that side, like a non-Muslim, they call it a genocide. And it's just fruitless to go further in a debate with those people.
You want to comment on that comment, or should I just remove it?
Okay. So Palestine was ethnically cleansed of Palestinians within what is now Israel in 1948. They didn't kill 100,000 Palestinians to do it, and some Palestinians remain. Harris is talking out of his ear hole. You can keep using that, and you can keep going back further and further in history. You can go where you want to draw the line. This is why I said it at the start, that whatever has happened, Pakistan was created, Israel was created, it does exist now. 9 million Israelis live there. 7 million of them are Jews. They don't want to live under a government establishment where they have a thin majority over Muslims. If Muslims, like the rest of the world, had a good track record of producing secular countries after secular countries, then I would have supported one state solution from the river to the sea, call it Palestine or whatever you want. Then I would have supported it. But I cannot blame the Jews for having their own state, but I can blame the Jews for not giving independence to Palestinian authorities. And I'm against the settlements in the West Bank as well. And I believe that once there is a political solution, when there is a real political will, when there is no more Hamas, when there is no more violence, the international community would be able to force Israel to evacuate those settlements and give that region back to the Palestinians. However, I do understand that the reason why Israel would want Hamas to linger on, I'm not giving a conspiracy theory, but I'm seeing that how it works, kind of like in the industrial military complex. People have these theories, and it makes a lot of sense that, yeah, if they're weapons manufacturer, they would want a conflict to go on so they can keep selling their weapons. So just like that, Israel, it may not be deliberately or actively enabling Hamas, but it serves in the interest of Israeli state for Hamas to exist, not to inflict injury, the kind of injury it inflicted upon Israel on the 7th of October, but to exist there as a boogeyman so they can keep turning a blind eye towards the settlers in the West Bank, because they have very strong claims on cities like Hebron and some other places in the West Bank. So
Mhm.
it's in Palestinians' interest to stop these terrorist activities. It's in Palestinian interest to get rid of Hamas, and then the world can rally behind them and force Israel to free the Palestinian territories. But again, the problem is 60%, we've shared this figure before, 60% of Palestinians in the West Bank and 60% of the Palestinians in Gaza, they don't support two-state solution. They want from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. If that is your starting position, I'm sorry, that is non-negotiable. We cannot expel 9 million Israelis or 7 million Jews from there. They call this home, and not just an ordinary home. It's a very prosperous, very effective Western-style democracy. I read a meme somewhere, and it made sense. The only Muslims in the Middle East who can elect their leader live in Israel. That says a lot.
Harris, going back to your idea that we're not sure if we can support the one state or not, and that's mainly coming from your idea or your understanding, being an ex-Muslim, I guess, that you don't trust Muslim countries, and we haven't ever seen Islam creating secular country after secular country, all the things that you said. In your perspective, the root of this Israeli-Palestinian conflict and what's happening today, do you think it is rooted in religious conflict, in historical claims, or is it merely a geopolitical domination and a game of power?
People present that argument as though these two positions could be mutually exclusive, especially when you involve Islam, maybe Judaism too. Politics becomes inseparable. Yes, even from the Jewish side, it is a religious issue. It is. Otherwise, why not any other part of the world? Why this part of the world? And again, I am willing to accept that and respect that as well, being an atheist. I can respect that. Some people say, you're an atheist. How can you respect that? I respect Pakistan's right to exist, even though it is found on Islamic principles, and we will create this lab for Islamic ideas. It was divided in the name of religion. I don't agree with it. I don't support it, but I respect its right to exist and it's people's right to choose the way they want to govern themselves. Okay. And I have to extend the same courtesy. I'm an atheist, but Jews are not atheists. They have their own religious beliefs or whatever. Isn't this a part of a liberal value that we have to respect people's religious beliefs? So it is a religious issue. There's no two ways about it. But I think Israel, as it has evolved, it is less of a theocracy. It doesn't behave like a theocracy. It is constantly fighting this existential threat, which is powered on the other side by religion. Let me add another caveat in that. I understand Palestinian people feel that they are native inhabitants of this land, so they can have a non-religious claim on this land. So they can have that. But this is where things get really interesting. These rest of the Muslims that you see who are jumping up and down in every major Western capital of the world, do you think that they care about some local people over a tiny, very tiny piece of land? They don't care about that. For the rest of the Muslims, it is about living their anti-Jewish fantasy. It's about the importance of Jerusalem. It's about reclaiming that holy land that Muslims occupied for over 1,000 years, maybe more. So for the rest of the Muslims, it is nothing but a religious issue. Nothing but a religious issue. MBS kills 300,000 in Yemen. Nobody bats an eye. Nobody cares about it. Bashar al-Assad kills 250,000 of his own people. Nobody cares. And here for 14,000 Palestinians, all these Muslims, suddenly they become humanist and they value Muslim lives. They don't. It's not about that. It's about reliving that moment. And Hamas cashes in on that. This is why Hamas is one of the worst, most vile, disgusting terrorist organizations. In their charter, they've written the Islamic eschatology hadith that, oh, Jew, the rocks will be speaking to, telling Muslims that, oh, Jew, there's a
Come and
Jew
kill the
hiding
Jew
behind
behind
me.
me.
Come and kill it. Exactly. So that's why I wonder, why does every Muslim celebrate? If they don't actively celebrate, why are they happy whenever their rockets fired into Israel? I'm talking about before 7th of October too. I've noticed that behavior, and I'm sure you have noticed that too. Why do they celebrate it? They know you're not going to win. Your enemy is like 100 times more powerful and has the support of the world's greatest military might the world has ever seen. So why do you get excited? They get excited because they think this is the time when, when Allah is going to come down, is going to be on our side, and is going to say, hey, Muslim, there's a Jew hiding behind me, come and kill it. This is why they get excited. Lipstick Muslims are not. They all
But
get excited.
not only that, Harris, even if they're not expecting the end of times as yet, what do you expect from when the Quran tells you
They might think that this is
most
the beginning of the end. Maybe these are those end times. Muslims have this fantasy of the end times are near. The end times are near.
quite possibly, but I'm saying that even if we're talking about Muslims who don't necessarily think it's at the end of times, the Quran itself advocates for the Jews being the most hated, sorry, the people that most hate the
La.
believers, i.e., the mu'mineen. End of times or not, we're talking here about a group that the Quran labels as the most hated ones, and these are the people that hate the believers most. Of course, whenever Hamas attacks those who are the first enemy of the believers, they're gonna scream Allahu Akbar and all the
I'm happy to take that as well. So the bigger point still remains that, barring the Palestinian people, again, they're in a conflict zone. Their emotions are different. They feel they're occupied. So I'm not going to hold them to the same standards as I would hold myself or you. I'm not going to do that. I understand their grievances are different and their anger is different, minus Hamas, of course, people I'm talking about. But the rest of the Muslims, they get excited because, and this is rooted not over a tiny territorial dispute between two groups of people. One of them happened to share the same skin color as you. No, it's not because of that. Because if that was it, then they would have shown same interest over Chinese Muslims, over Yemeni Muslims, over Syrian Muslims. They would have shown same interest. No, hundreds of times more people got killed over there, and then they showed no interest. This is about Jewish hatred, as you said. the enemies of the believers, mu'minins, are these Jews. They hate them, and that's why they get this special boner every time they see any casualty inflicted on Israeli side. I think we agree. We agree on that point.
I think we do agree. So before I ask the next question, do you think, I'm not sure if you never used that term, so I don't want to put any words on your mouth. Do you think Islam is by definition or by default an anti-Semitic ideology?
Absolutely, it is.
All right.
I have a whole Jewish folder. They speak from both sides of their mouth when it comes to their relationships with Jews. There are contextual hadiths where Prophet Muhammad has said, abuse a Jew, put him in the tiny, narrowest part of the street, etc., which becomes so trivial. But if your eschatology, if your end times are based on the fact that you'll be killing every single Jew, this is a very, I'm not saying that every Muslim would probably believe in it, even though a lot of them do. But, and I think that people can change. So I'm willing to give Muslims a concession here that when push comes to shove, they'll be like, no, come on. We've seen that. We've seen that happen in the 30s and the 40s in Europe when people on the same side actually protected Jews. So I think I would imagine in those times, a lot of good Muslims would be protecting Jews. Um, but the doctrine itself says that I am not going to end this earth before my Muslims would be killing every single Jew. I will
Agree.
even give you the aid of rocks and trees. That is, if this is not, there is a video of a Islamic cleric who says this is not anti-Semitic, this is just a part of our faith. Yeah, the faith
When
itself
nature itself, trees and
is
rocks
going
are
to
going to
turn
turn
us.
against Jews. Yeah, of course it's not anti-Semitic.
Let me
I
ask you: Do you think that Islam is anti-Semitic?
wholeheartedly.
Oh
I
yeah.
I wholeheartedly think that Islam is anti-Semitic, and I would even argue that even in Christianity, in the Christian Bible, so in the New Testament, you will have more gospels that are more anti-Semitic, i.e., Matthew, for instance, will be more anti-Semitic than other gospels. So
Are they as extreme as
no,
this, the way you
not
have to
nothing.
kill them?
Nothing, no, nothing as extreme or even when I say anti-Semitism in the Christian Bible, we're talking in historical context, like at the time of Jesus. The
Yeah, like what they
Jews
did to.
killed the Jesus,
Yeah, yeah,
but in Islam, they take it one step further, where you actually nowadays and at the
kill
end
them.
of times, you have to kill every single Jew. That is a different.
Mm.
Um, but in saying that, when you think about the hatred between Muslims and Jews, and certainly the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, do you distinguish between certain labels like Jewish and Zionism or Zionist? Or I know that you certainly differentiate between Palestinians and Hamas. Okay, so here we're talking about two different groups.
I can differentiate between Palestinians and the rest of the Muslim world too.
Oh wow, okay. Tell me more about this,
Yeah, look, as I said, that
and please tell me about the difference also between Jewish and Zionist.
so I actually thought about this because I heard my friend Armin say that he's a Zionist, and then I looked up the definition. Zionist, such a dirty word. And I looked at it, I was like, okay, Zionist would have meant back in the day when Theodor Herzl started this movement in 1898, a homeland for Jewish people. And obviously that's this region, Judea and all this, the Jerusalem region. Okay, I would not have been a Zionist back then because I'm not an atheist. I don't think that God can give you this. But now, once Israel is created, then someone who supports the existence of or the continuation of the state of Israel, 100% on that. I do support that. If you support that Israel has a right to exist, you're a Zionist too. But I think it does get a bit complicated when I was thinking about it that all people are allowed to have their homeland, basically, like Mecca for, let's just say Saudi Arabia. No one's taking Saudi Arabia away from Muslims. And it has been the case. It's been such that they never had to let go of that. Like, no Christians or Hindus went there and occupied that, so they didn't have to start another movement and call it something else like Islamiyazm or some whatever instead of Zionism. So the Jews were a different bunch. Had they kept living there throughout the last 2,000 years, there would have been no Zionism. It would have been just Jews living in their ancestral homeland. I think they do both go hand in hand, because as a Jew, I think you should have a right to a certain land, even though, as I said, like, I'm saying that as an atheist. Uh, Just like I would say Muslims have a right over Mecca. No one should be able to come and take them. Polytheists cannot come around and say, 1400 years ago, we had our idols inside. They did, which Muhammad broke. We had our idols there, so we're going to have half of the Kaaba to us. The whole religious claim of Muslims on Jerusalem is just so pathetic. It's not even your second most holiest site. It's the third holiest site after Medina, Mecca being the first one. And why is it holy? Two reasons that it is considered holy. Muslims prayed in that direction for 18 months. Is it 18 or 16 months, something like that? Insignificant amount of time. And then Umar said, "Oh dear Muhammad, we should be praying in our own direction." And then the verse came in the Quran that you can pray in that direction. And secondly, when Prophet Muhammad flew to heaven on his winged donkey, he parked his donkey there, Barak, in Jerusalem. That's the only religious theological relevance it has. And again, Muslims who say that, oh, this is a human rights issue, it's a political issue, it's got nothing to do with religion. Why are you so hell bent on claiming Jerusalem? Why? You've got so many other mosques in so many other parts of the world. I don't see you making noise for it. You make noise for this one. So it is a religious issue for them too. So to answer your question, I think you can't separate the idea of a homeland for a certain religious group of people. So therefore, you can't actually separate Zionism from Jews or Judaism. I don't think you can.
I want to address something that keeps coming in the comment because I said that Matthew as a gospel was the most anti Semitic out of all gospels, and it didn't sit well with some people. First of all, that's not just a personal opinion, that's most biblical scholars make that claim that Matthew is, at least in its language, is the most anti Semitic, again, in comparison to other gospels. That's one. Two, you can be a Jew and eventually you become anti-Semitic if you hate that society. And Harris was talking about it in different contexts that we have many people today that are uncomfortable and don't like their own society and their own background. So Matthew, while may have come from a Jewish background, because he embraced Jesus and he became Christian, he can then turn against the traditional Jewish people and become against them. And the Christianity in general believe that the Jews will have the temple collapse. They should be in the diaspora for the rest of their life until Jesus comes back. In a way, the Christian ideology also has some anti-Semitic elements. The only difference is that Christianity doesn't call for going and killing the Jews. It doesn't call for an action to go and eradicate the Jews, but it certainly has some hate language towards the Jews. And as I said, it's not just a personal opinion. It's an opinion that is held among biblical scholars. And yeah, let me leave it at that. But Harris, I want to come back to you and ask you: do you think that either the Palestinians or the Israelis, or well, let's say the Palestinians or the Jewish people, are the indigenous people of the land?
I don't think either one of them can prove that genetically. Look, I'm not an expert in that, but as much as I've looked into it, it doesn't look convincing on either side. So we have Mizrahi Jews who were also expelled. Now that's a genocide from Morocco, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen in the late 40s. 2 million Jews came, and now I think they make up 4 million or 3.5 million people of the current Jewish population in Israel. They're Mizrahi Arab Jews, Arab, so they are local, obviously, but from the surrounding region. And there are a lot of obviously European looking Jews. The argument that I read, which is favorable to this whole notion of we're local people here, so it belongs to us, and the other side says it belongs to us. Why this idea should never be employed is because for 2,000 years, unless you were totally cut off from the outside world, unless you were living in the Andaman Islands or you were an Aboriginal in Australia, you could not be totally from that particular region. And obviously, that region has been a very busy region for the last 2,000 years or so, maybe more. So, no one can trace back their roots to the, I don't know, to the Philistines or Amalekites or Canaanites or any of those people. Nobody can do it. So I think there is not enough. As I said, I'm not a geneticist, but as much as I've read on that, I think
Mm.
neither side can prove their links back to the original Canaanites people.
Fair enough.
Is that right though? Have you?
Um,
What is your opinion? Is that true though? Or?
that's I would agree to some extent with it. I think what happened. So the Philistines of the Bible, the ones that the Bible talks about, I don't think this indigenous group exists anymore.
There were
These people,
seafarer people with red hair or something. Apparently, that's how.
yeah,
Is that right?
and they were actually they were very big on making alcohol and having festivals of alcohol. And what today has nothing to do with the culture and the ethnicity of the Palestinian people. And the way I talk about it with my friends, so I came from Egypt, and I make the claim that I'm an indigenous Egyptian. So I was an ex-Christian. Sorry, I am an ex-Christian. I was a Christian, and I came from a Coptic descent. I even did the ancestry DNA, and I found that I think about 20% of my DNA comes from North African and Ethiopian people back in the dates or back in the time where Egypt, ancient Egypt as a kingdom, got all the way down to Sudan. That aside, what happened to the indigenous Egyptian or the Coptic people that lived in Egypt after Islam came and the Arabs invaded Egypt? What happened is a process of integration. The good thing is that in certain areas of Egypt, they still maintained the language and the ethnicity. They refused to marry from the Arabs. They maintained the Coptic language in the rituals in the church. And that's why until today, you would find indigenous Egyptians. But to make the claim that Egypt as a whole country is the same Egypt that was ancient Egypt, that's utter
Mhm.
nonsense.
Yeah.
You cannot make that claim.
Despite having this practice of keeping your bloodline internal and pure, still over 2,000 years, you can't say that, okay, we're the
Because
same
it's a
people.
minority. Because we're talking about a very small amount of people that would have that lineage, but Egypt as a 100 million population, the
Yeah, yeah.
majority it's a Muslim majority, and the majority of the DNA of Egypt is, Arabic DNA. It comes from the Arabs, not from the
What about
indigenous
Christian
Egyptian.
what about Coptic Christians? What about them? Could they say that we are the same people from 2,000 years ago?
They could, however, I would say that you have to take a DNA test to prove that sort of lineage. Because
What do you
even
think?
if you really have a pure lineage and you have a family tree and you can trace it to a decent amount of generations, I think you can make that claim. But again, it goes for individuals. It doesn't go for the nation anymore. What I'm trying to make here,
Yeah, let's just translate that to
yeah.
Palestine.
So if you go to Palestine, first of all, Palestine never had that kind of reservation that we don't marry from the Arabs or the Palestinians that you see today are all Arabs. They are majority Muslim. They speak Arabic. They don't have any
Nasri?
ethnic language.
Masri is
No,
also
no.
the surname I've heard. I don't know. I could be wrong. A lot of them
Um,
are Jordanian or Masri. Is that true? How true is
that
that?
may have integrated with Egyptians or Jordanians. But they don't have basically pure ethnic genes. They fully integrated with the Arabs that they became Arabs. Palestinians
Right.
today are Arabs. So there is no way you can say that the Palestinians that live today, even though they carry the same name, they are the same Palestinians as the time of the Bible. They are not
Mm,
the same nation. They only carried the name because of the land. And
mm.
mainly it came from the Roman Empire trying to humiliate the Jewish
Yeah.
people. So they insisted on calling the land Palestine.
See, this is how fair I am. I don't hold that argument against Palestinian people either. And I say, even if you can't prove your genetic link to the ancient biblical people, you still have a right because now you do live here. You are here. So
100%.
we need to find a solution from this position onwards. You can't arbitrarily draw a line from 634 when Muslim forces conquered this region, or when the Ottomans came, or the Mamluks came, or when the Christian kingdom when they took over. It's all arbitrary. It's happened. Now it's been 75 years. 75 years is a long time, and
Mhm.
the dust should have settled by now. It's okay. What's done is done. Let's move on. And this is why I say, and I think this is not a belief of convenience either, this historical conservatism idea. I see these people, these blue-haired, this is the funniest bunch that you come across in the West. They're fighting, for example, in Australia, these people are saying, return the land back to the natives. You're saying that in Australia? When are you going to give this land back to the Aboriginals then? These people are just so stupid. We don't do that for a reason. You can't go back and right the wrongs of the history. You can't do that because once you start doing it, you're going to inflict more pain than the original injury that was caused on people
Yeah.
because that's done. You can't go around and correcting it. People like Muhammad Hijab and all these, a lot of these popular propagandists who have become a very major and important voice when it comes to representing Muslim sentiment online. It is what it is. Even they don't support two-state solution. You know
Mhm.
why? Because it's so easy for him to say that from England. And this is what my beef is with the rest of the Muslim world. And as I said, like how I differentiate Palestinian people from the rest of the Muslim population. They're saying, stay there, keep sacrificing your lives for this holy land. We will give you moral support, but we will not do anything because, of course, they can't do anything. I don't see him going to Gaza and fighting for Gazan civilians. He's not doing that. He would never do that. So these are beliefs of convenience of these people, and I feel bad at the end of the day. I wish we could reach out to the Palestinian people, and my heart literally sank when I saw those hundreds upon hundreds of people who were chanting anti-Hamas slogans from within Gaza.
Seeing that, yeah.
And I was like, yeah, you are just paying this terrible price because there's some nut jobs who live outside of this region. They see you as nothing but pawns. You're a pawn in the great religious fantasy that this holy land belongs to Muslims and Muslims should take over. By the way, you keep paying the price by sacrificing your children.
That's yeah. It is the sad reality, but that's also why I wanted to know your opinion on, like, if you believe that any of the two parties are the indigenous people of the land. Because at the end of the day, it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. We're talking about the people who are living today. They were born in this land. So whether they have a historical lineage or not, it's irrelevant. This is their land and they know nowhere else. So these people have
Adam,
to learn to coexist. Yeah.
I was born in Pakistan. You were born in Egypt. We came to Australia. We weren't even born here.
Australia's home.
Australia is home. It's home for me. I would never live anywhere else. I
100%.
love this country so much. These Palestinians who've been living here for many generations, it's their country now. It's their land. And a lot of Arab Jews who were expelled from the surrounding countries. Now they live in Israel. They're a couple of generations, 3 generations old Israelis as well. That land belongs to them. So you have to, for heaven's sake, you have to find a middle ground. And these people who are adding fuel to the fire from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Those people are the enemies of the Palestinian people and peace.
So let me, yeah, we're coming close to an hour now, and I think you answered most of the questions that I had on this. But what do you think is a long-term solution? And by what I mean by a long-term solution is, do you
Peace?
see a solution that could potentially ensure the not just peace, the coexistence of Israel and Palestine? Because we can establish peace with eradicating one nation, but that's not what I'm heading towards.
Obviously,
Like,
no.
is
Mhm.
do you think they can coexist?
It's going to be worse than what is India and Pakistan. Even when Palestinian states are established, I don't think there will be peace even after that. But I do support two-state solution, and I think that is, and this is the reason. This is Israeli argument. You got to understand that. You got to put yourself in their shoes. They say there's going to be a hostile country who's never going to accept our existence, and there will be a hostile nation on both sides, West Bank and Gaza, and we'll be in a perpetual state of war. And I understand that, and I buy that. But I don't want to see this conflict linger anymore. So this is why I'm like, that's a fight for another day, basically. Unfortunately, as we discussed earlier, the anti-Semitism, the dreams of glory and conquest in Islamic theology, they're so deep-rooted that they just cannot go away. You can't wish them away. The only reason they'll go away is when Palestinians and other Muslims stop taking Islam seriously, when they start putting these hadiths like there's a Jew hiding behind me, come and kill it, when they start putting that in the trash can where they belong, until that happens, there's going to be no true peace. We can create two-state solution. The international community can force the Israeli government to create Palestinian states, but I don't think that would be the end of it.
Even though I said that was my last question, but because of what you just said, I have one more question for you. Do you believe so if I take your answer as there will be no permanent peace until we basically eradicate Islam or at least put these kind of hadith and beliefs in the rubbish bin, do you believe that Islam needs to be eradicated, or is there a chance for a reformation, like a reformed version of Islam where it actually can live harmoniously with the Jews?
My position keeps evolving because I look at myself and I look at other ex-Muslim atheists. Their lives are just perfectly fine without Islam. So we say, why do you need it? But then I look at some other people who are really liberal in their mindset. For them, Islam is nothing but a spiritual desire of their mind and body. And then, yes, they do harbinger those thoughts that Jews are the enemies of Islam and all of that kind of stuff. But as I said, when push comes to shove, these are the people who would be hiding Jews, protecting them from those Muslims who are looking to kill them. So it has happened for other religions. I think when certain hadiths and certain verses are gone and enough generations have passed, maybe. But then you look at this rise of radical Islam, like Hakikachus and hijabs and these guys who openly, boastfully propagate those ideas of Islam that for 1400 years, Muslims have been hiding them. They've been trying to keep it under wraps, especially in this day and age. In the 90s and the 80s, Muslims were very good in safeguarding Aisha's age, 9. They now not only say that Muhammad married a 9-year-old, you should go and do it too. There's nothing wrong with that. They're not being viewed as some crazy nutbags. We have seen the rise of this far left who say it's okay. We respect your views of these pedophilic views. So that makes me lose hope that maybe it's not as simple as we thought. Humans are remarkable creatures. I think they can
That's a very
expect.
polite way of putting it.
Yeah, but they can accept anything. It just doesn't make any sense. If a Christian walks up to a blue-haired person and says that homosexuality is a sin, they'll shout and would probably end up physically harming him. But then a Muslim goes up to him and say LGBTQ, this is sin, it's an abomination, blah blah
We
blah.
respect your
We
beliefs.
respect you. Yes, it's okay. LGBTQ for Palestine. It's just,
Oh, I
I
saw
I don't
that.
get it.
Yes, I saw that on your tweets. Oh my god.
I could not
Um,
take it. I was so angry at this LGBTQ for Palestine. We were saying
you're the
LGBT.
sufferers of this ideology.
No, but to make matters worse, here's what is it, Adam. If there's a ceasefire and Gaza is freed, they go there and they say, "Hey, we played a role for you." They will be killed. Or if they manage to escape, you know where they're gonna go? They're gonna run to Israel for asylum. There's so many LGBTQ from Gaza and the West Bank who have fled to Israel. So how can LGBTQ or feminists standing up with Hamas is like these people would have stood up for Taliban. And look what happened after Taliban came to power. What happened? Girls can't go to schools, women can't go to universities. I think before this conflict, I read this report that Afghanistan is the most depressed nation on earth because they've literally gone from almost equality. We're still a very backward society, but to nothing. Just imagine that. So they think Hamas is any different from the Taliban. So it just, I don't know. This world is so crazy. Sometimes it just doesn't make
It's
any
the
sense to me.
very definition of cognitive dissonance. The very it's like
Or
that
tickets for
meme.
tickets for KFC.
Exactly, chicken defending KFC. Harris, thank you so much. And before I wrap up, is there anything else you want to add or say before we end the show?
Well, thank you for hosting me. Yeah, I want to emphasize on this point again that, as I said, we discussed many elements of this conflict, and in order to be able to find a workable solution, you have to look at the dispute itself. 10,000 civilians, that's 10,000 too many. Not a single person should have died. But I know it's easier said than done. That's not how conflicts work. people unfortunately die. People died on the Israeli side as well. But that does not mean that people like me don't value human life, whether that's Israeli or Palestinian. Obviously, Palestinian people are suffering a lot more purely in terms of numbers. If you say 1,200 Israelis were killed, now 14,000 Palestinians have died. I don't know, 4 or 5,000 of them could be Hamas soldiers. We don't know that. We can't trust. But let's just say 10,000 people have died, and a lot of children have died. It's not easy for people like us to look at it either. But this propaganda that I see regurgitated again, not I don't have any grievance with the Palestinian people, but this propaganda that is regurgitated over and over again by these other non-Palestinian Muslims, deliberately demonizing or dehumanizing people like us, are saying that we somehow draw pleasure out of that or we don't care about those Palestinian lives. It's utter bullshit. And it's an emotional argument, and they're trying to turn it into an emotional argument and trying to demonize you. And that's nothing could be further from the truth. I stopped looking at my Twitter feed because I don't want to get desensitized. And I think a lot of people are getting desensitized. So the initial shock factor of those brutal videos that we saw, limbs blown up, people's heads blown up, limbs dangling by a tiny shred of skin, it scared a lot of people. But I think it's desensitizing a lot of people too, because we're no longer seeing the same intensity of these protests. This is what happens. This is the reason why civilized countries stopped executing violent criminals publicly, because you don't want to see violence to an extent that you get desensitized to it. Then you
Yeah.
lose the value of human life and its sanctity. That's the reason why we don't do corporal punishments. We don't show them. Muslims have this obsession of corporal punishments and public executions because they think that, oh, that would scare people. No, that it would momentarily scare people, but it would desensitize people. And this is exactly what they're doing. So they tried this to shock you, but that's not. I think even Muslims are losing it. I think Muslims are losing. And that is the worst disservice to Palestinian people. Because if you've used these extreme measures to try to demonize other people, try to make them feel like they're animals or they don't care about human life, etc., blah, 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 you've played your hand. What are you going to do after that as people start losing interest in that? So I care about Palestinian lives. I cannot wait for the moment, for the day this conflict is resolved. And once it's resolved, and I see that would be the tombstone of Hamas, then the international community would pressure the Israeli government to find a workable solution. I think that David Cameron made a statement that there has to be a solution. Civilian casualties is too high, but I think Biden administration made a statement that there has to be a resolution after this. So hopefully we can get to that stage sooner rather than later.
Hopefully. Thank you, Harris. And I second that. And I wholeheartedly support Palestinians in having a peaceful life and the right to exist. I wholeheartedly support Israel in having its state and living peacefully and existing. And as I always say, I am not a pro Palestinian or pro Israelite Israel. I am pro human life, and I really cannot wait to find a solution that can allow both parties to coexist in peace, if such solution exists. Thank you so much for accepting my invitation and for being here. Until next time, everyone.
Thank you. If you'd like to support my work, you can become my patron by going to patreon.com/Harris Sultan, or you can simply buy me a coffee.